Mark Schanowski here with us on Sports Talk Chicago. And Mark, we want to talk some Bears now. What do you make of all these moves so far this offseason for them? I think they're looking very good.
Yeah, they've got a long way to go, though, John. When you finish with the worst record in the league, you could make the argument that they may only have 4 or 5 core players, and then you're filling in another, 17 to 18 spots on your starting lineups. So they have a long way to go, and I give Ryan Poles a lot of credit for filling in a lot of key positions. I really like the 2 linebackers they signed. I think those guys are going to be impact players immediately. I think they did a good job in the draft last year, picking up a starting corner and a starting safety that I think are going to be good players for them for a lot of years to come. They didn't really address their questions on the offensive line, but hopefully they can still do that either later in free agency or with some of those high picks that they have in the upcoming draft. But I think they're off to a really good start. I think the DJ Moore acquisition is really kind of underrated at this point. I mean, here you got a 25-year-old guy who put up great numbers with the Carolina Panthers. I don't know if he's exactly a number 1 receiver, but he is a guy that can stretch the field, who put up good numbers with the Panthers. And I think that he'll give Justin Fields a target who can really open up the field and make his job a lot easier.
How big of a jump are you expecting for Fields now with all these weapons at his disposal?
Well, the key thing, though, John, is they have to solidify that offensive line.
Yeah.
Everyone talked about the fact that he was putting up record numbers running the football, but he was also exposing himself to a lot of big hits. He's a strong guy, and he was able to stay in games last year, but there were times where he took a hit, and you're just like, man, I don't know how many more of those he can take. Hopefully, he'll be more effective passing within the pocket. He'll be a little more patient with a better offensive line and with better receivers to throw to, and he won't have to find himself making the one read, seeing that the offensive protection is crumbling, and then immediately running. Maybe he can give it an extra beat and scan for secondary receivers and maybe hit some plays later in the progressions as he's looking down the field.
Do you think his problem with passing last year was more so an offensive line issue, or was he still trying to learn out the position? Was it a combination of both? What do you think about that?
I think those are both factors. I think also that, he needs to improve on his accuracy, especially throwing the intermediate to deep ball. And that's something that he was very candid in talking about at the end of the season when he met the media, that, he's not a guy who's ever going to point fingers at his teammate. He's never going to say, well, I didn't have enough time to look down the field or scan for second or third targets. I think he realizes that he missed some guys. He threw the ball high at times. He does need to improve his accuracy, but I think with better receivers, with a guy like DJ Moore who can stretch the field, and hopefully by getting that extra second with better offensive line protection, you'll see him improving in all those areas.
Do you have any expectations, or at least baseline expectations, for Fields this year?
Well, I think his passing numbers are going to jump dramatically. I think you're going to see him go into the mid 60% range in terms of completion percentage. I think his passing yardage is going to jump up dramatically. His interceptions, I think, will probably stay around where they were this year. But I don't think, I think you're going to see the big jump in touchdown into interception, so his ratio will be that much better. I think you're going to see a huge jump from Justin Fields in year 3, and I think the whole Bears offense is going to look a lot better. The question is going to be where they're going to fare in a Central Division it's kind of hard to forecast right now. I mean, the Lions came on so strong at the end of the year. They've got a couple of first-round draft picks to use. I think the Lions are probably going to be the favorite going into this season. Minnesota coming off a really good year last year, but I think a lot of that was a little bit of a smoke and mirrors year because their point differential wasn't really that good despite their record. And Green Bay is likely to take a precipitous fall with Aaron Rodgers leaving town.
Do you think he ends up going to the Jets? I know there's been reports, nothing's official yet. Is that where you think he's going to go?
Oh, he's gone. They've burned that bridge. Not only burned it, they've torpedoed it, whatever analogy you want to use. There's no way Aaron Rodgers is going back to Green Bay. The Packers front office is completely sick and tired of all the drama. And he didn't play well last year. Now, granted, he fractured his thumb. And, for a quarterback, that's just a devastating injury. I'm sure that impacted him on a lot of throws that he missed last year. But the Packers are done. They're going to turn it over to Jordan Love. They had a couple of first-round draft picks on the defensive side last year. I think in the short term, they're hoping that an improved defense and a good running game can keep them competitive. But it'll be a couple of years until they know whether or not Jordan Love is going to be a quarterback who can keep them competitive in the NFC North.
You think it's going to be Lions, at least right now, at number one? Why do you say that?
Well, look at the way they played late in the year. I think they won like 7 of their last 8, something like that. They were remarkable late in the year. If you watch the Hard Knocks series on HBO, Dan Campbell is a magnetic personality as a head coach. I think his guys love playing for him. Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, also a guy who carries a lot of respect from the team. I just think it's a fun coaching staff that really got the most out of their players. Jared Goff quietly had a really good year last season. You know, the Rams gave up on him, and it paid off, you know, in terms of winning a Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford. But then the Rams took a big step backwards last year. They got their one Super Bowl, so I'm sure they're happy with the trade. But, you know, I think the Lions, they added David Montgomery from the Bears as a guy who's going to be a factor in the running game. Their defense is only going to be better next year. I think that they're probably the favorite, Minnesota 1A, and I think that, you know, the Bears, I think they need to take a step, an intermediate step. My goal, if I would be Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, was finish around 500, 8-9, 9-8. I think that'd be a very successful season.
What did you think about the David Montgomery move? I read a report last week that the main difference maker was in year 2 of the contract, Detroit offered him more guaranteed money than the Bears. But what do you make of those details and then Montgomery leaving Chicago?
Yeah, I think it just falls in line with what we've seen about the devaluation of the running back position in the NFL. I mean, most of the time I watch football, the running back was king. You know, you always teams would do almost anything to get an elite workhorse running back that they could use both on the ground and in the passing game. And when you had one, you just hung on to him. You valued him for dear life, and you just used him over and over and over again. And now they look at it as, you know, almost like disposable socks or something that you get your wear out of them and you throw them away. Most teams are just happy to take a running back in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round, use him for 3 or 4 years, and say, all right, well, we'll bring in a young guy at low money. We'll let him get pounded for a few years, and then we'll move on. You see very few running backs that last 8, 9, 10 years. Look what's happened to Ezekiel Elliott in Dallas. He was devalued the last couple of years. Granted, he had some injuries, but right now they just cut him, and he's getting very little interest on the free agent market because they look at him as a guy that at age 29 or 30 is basically finished.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. I mean, as you mentioned, you followed Chicago sports forever. Walter Payton.
Yeah.
Night and day difference between the running back situation of today, or even guys like Emmitt Smith, Barry Sanders. It's a much different sport when it comes to running backs today than it was back then.
Yeah, and you look at so many great running backs of the past, they were featured in just about everything that a team would do. Now you're going to have a different running back on 1st and 2nd down as you're going to have on 3rd down. You'll go to multiple wide receivers, and if you have a guy who's a good receiver as a running back who maybe can get open on a wheel route or get down the field a little bit, then you'll use him. Otherwise, a lot of teams will go with no running backs on 3rd down. So the offensive structures have changed so much in the last 5 to 10 years that the running back position has become so devalued that teams don't want to invest big dollars. That's why, you know, Saquon Barkley, there was talk about would the Giants re-sign him. He knew that he wasn't going to have a big market in free agency, so there really weren't a lot of options for him.
Do you trust in Khalil Herbert to take on this bigger load now that Montgomery's gone?
I think he'll be the starter, but that's not to say that they won't bring in another guy, whether it's in one of the later rounds of the draft or later in free agency. I think I saw a figure last week that the Bears still have something like $38 million available to spend. So they can still go out and add somebody in free agency. I mean, you know, if they wanted a short yardage back, they could potentially take a flyer on Ezekiel Elliott as a goal line, you know, short yardage back if they wanted to do something like that. I don't think that's likely. I don't think, you know, because he has been kind of pouty at times when he doesn't get his touches. So I don't think with a young team on the rise, I don't think they're going to want to bring in a lot of veterans who might not be happy in a limited role. I think more likely they'll bring in a guy that, they can use as either a 3rd down back or a guy who's happy with limited touches. You know, they did bring in a running back from Seattle who's more of a special teams guy, but that's the kind of thing they'll be looking at to supplement Herbert.